We wanted to bring you this really extraordinary interview between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Tony Dokoupil of NBC News. And so Ta-Nehisi, of course, really rose to prominence as like a prominent intellectual based on, first he wrote The Case for Reparations in Atlantic Magazine, and then he's also an author of a number of books, and so he's most associated with like the anti-racism movement, and in particular, I think it's fair, and I don't know if he would object to this characterization, he's sort of a race pessimist, right? The idea like this is the founding sin, and you know, this is America's legacy, and this is something we can never get over, which I have disagreements with, you certainly have disagreements
I will
with,
tell you,
etc.
I despise him solely for that, regardless of what he says now. I blame him actually for a huge amount of the intellectual anti-racism revolution, but regardless, we can stick to this subject for right now.
So he has a new book out called The Message. And in it, I've been reading it almost all the way through it. And in it, he tells 3 different stories. And the book, the central theme of the book is basically that writers have a responsibility to speak out for the voiceless, to tell stories in a way that matters. And so he goes to Senegal and talks about what that's like and what that experience is like for him, reflecting on his ancestry and the legacy of slavery. He talks about going to Columbia, South Carolina, where a teacher was being viciously attacked for teaching one of his books in the classroom in her, I think, AP English class. And then he goes to Israel, and he talks about Israel being an apartheid state. And it is the largest section of the book, and it's also, obviously, in the American political context, the most provocative. So what's interesting about Ta-Nehisi Coates is that he was overwhelmingly celebrated for his previous work, you know, and really became like an insider, you know, in these like elite circles and media circles and beloved in those circles from his previous work. Now he's telling a story that is very uncomfortable for them and that they don't want to hear and that they don't celebrate and is incredibly challenging and not often heard in Western media. So the result of that tension is this interview right here. Let's take a listen.
When I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian-American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out. But what I saw in Palestine, what I saw on the West Bank, what I saw in Haifa in Israel, what I saw in the South Hebron Hills, those were the stories that I have not heard. And those were the stories that I was most occupied with.
So that's basically the first question out of the gate.
Yeah,
and by the way, I said NBC, it's CBS.
Yes.
But yeah, basically accusing him of being a terrorist effectively. And the framing of the question to me is incredibly significant because it gives up the game that if he didn't have this elite insider status that he can now trade on and effectively burn, because that's what he's doing right now. All the political capital he built up in this world, he's now burning through at a lightning pace because of what he says in the message. Like, he doesn't even get that interview if he's not Ta-Nehisi Coates, if he hasn't won those awards, if he doesn't have that elite status. And that's part of what his book doesn't say, he's an excellent writer. It's well written. It's, extraordinarily provocative, not provocative, but evocative in terms of taking you into the life of a Palestinian, living in Israel or living in the occupied territories. So it's important, but it's not really new ground. What makes it incredibly important is because of who he is and the fact that he's allowed into these rooms. So that was the opening question out of the gate. I have another clip that I'm going to show you, which is basically the rest of the interview. Also, these formats of like 5-minute interviews are so absurd. Ridiculous. But I want to get your reaction to that before we move on to the second piece.
I just thought it was wild. That's a wild thing to say. As I literally said, I don't like Ta-Nehisi Coates. I genuinely blame. I think he might be the godfather of a lot of the race problems that we have today. That's not an exaggeration in terms of that essay, The Case for Reparations, single-handedly radicalized every white girl on a college campus who eventually ended up working at the New York Times, behest of the BLM movement, of all this other nonsense that we have today. So I really do find him a villain in American politics. That said, I don't even like him, and I would not open with a question like that because that's wild. It would be an interrogation of the book itself, and not to say something like that would belong, what did he say, in an extremist
The backpack of an extremist.
That's an insane thing to say, and especially considering that guy didn't disclose a lot of his own biases whenever it comes to Israel. So that's another problem, I think, that was going into that. Do you want to listen to the rest of it?
Yeah. I mean, I just want to respond a little bit to
Sure, go. Yeah,
I mean, I disagree with the race pessimist view. But I don't know, to be so call him a villain and evil and causing every racial problem in America is crazy.
That essay was the godfather of the anti-racist movement.
I mean, he's allowed to have a perspective and write what he wants. That doesn't make him a villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to acknowledge that racism in America and that this continues to be a legacy that matters today. There's not that's a noble thing to do. So the fact he comes to a different conclusion than you or I, of course it's noble.
No.
That he comes to a different conclusion than you or I don't know, you're villainizing him in a way that's not that different from the way Tony DeCoppel is here on CBS.
I would say to his face, and I also wouldn't call him an extremist, I would say, I think your case for reparations was the reason that we have all this DEI bullshit, and that you effectively radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that racism is the single biggest problem in American life.
So you would blame Ta-Nehisi Coates
absolutely.
Over, the police that murdered George Floyd, over Donald Trump and all of his many provocations. I mean, I just think that to lay the blame at the feet of one person is sort of insane.
Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, again, is what radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that burning the country down because a single cop murdered George Floyd was a good idea. Or for everybody to start quoting Martin Luther King and this all bullshit about the riot is the voice of the unheard. All of that stems from him and his case for reparations.
That is crazy.
I'm not the only person who's thinking
that is crazy to lay the blame. Okay, again, he's allowed to hold his political positions that he has, and he's allowed to make, a case in the Atlantic magazine or wherever for whatever he wants to make.
He shouldn't. He should. Go
make him more of a villain than a police officer that murdered someone for doing nothing is, to me, wild. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the rest of this interview because this is also quite extraordinary because that was just the beginning. The opening question is basically, aren't you a terrorist for thinking this? And then the rest of it, he goes on to insinuate that he's effectively an anti-Semite, must be an anti-Semite for holding these views. Let's take a listen to that.
But if you were to read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place committing horrific acts on a daily basis. So I think the question is central and key. If Israel has a right to exist, and if your answer is no, then I guess the question becomes, why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries have a right to exist?
My answer is that no country in this world establishes its ability to exist through rights. Countries establish their ability to exist through force, as America did. And so I think this question of right to Israel does exist. It's a fact. The question of its right is not a question that I would be faced with any other country.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case, of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down the street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another pastor. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important. It is
extremely important.
Yeah, let me lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does. He can't ride on certain roads. He can't get water in the same way that Israeli citizens who live less than a mile away from him can.
And why is that okay? Why is that? Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong. It's really, really simple. Either what I saw was right or it's wrong. I am, for instance, against the death penalty. What the person did to get the death penalty, it really doesn't matter to me. I don't care if they were selling a nickel bag of marijuana or if they were a serial killer. I am against the death penalty. I am against a state that discriminates against people on the basis of ethnicity. I'm against that. There is nothing the Palestinians could do that would make that okay for me. My book is not based on the hyper-morality of the Palestinian people.
And that's basically the entirety of the interview. And I think that the key point he makes there is like, listen, I don't care. There's nothing the Palestinians could have done that would make me say apartheid is morally acceptable. Like, that would make me change my value. So it's either right or it's wrong. And all of this attempt, and this is part of what really, upset people and became a whole, conversation online, is in an excerpt he had said, listen, people as a dodge say that this is all very complicated. When, sure, like the history is complicated, no doubt about it. The morality of it, if you have some basic principles, really isn't. And so again, it's not that no one said these things before. It's because he was so uniformly celebrated in these circles and he's allowed in these circles. For him to say it is part of why there's, this sort of like collective meltdown and why Tony DeCopel takes I don't know if he's ever taken such an aggressive posture with an interview subject previously. This is morning show stuff. Normally it's like very fluffy. And he comes in loaded for bear with every single talking point you can imagine.
It's not a surprise. I mean, look, again, my disagreement with Coates is Coates believes America as much as an apartheid state as Israel. And that's why I can't stand the guy.
No, he believes that it was under Jim Crow, which is correct.
No, but his essay about the case for reparations makes the case that we effectively still live in an apartheid society, which is insane. And
we still have massive wealth.
That's not the same thing as apartheid. That's what I'm saying, is that he sees moral equivalence between the two, which I think is outrageous for a country that has done more than any other country.
That is not what he articulates in this book, and it's not what he articulates in this interview. But I think he deserves a lot of
no one
credit.
will ever push him on
I think
freaking
he deserves a lot of credit for the fact that he is burnt all of that elite credibility that he got. He's burning it right now to say something that should be obvious on its face, that is, powerfully true, and certainly impacted him when he went and visited. And the fact that he is willing to burn that elite credibility and capital that he has on behalf of, yes, a group of people who in the American political media context are voiceless. I think he deserves nothing but praise and admiration for having the courage to do that, which is not an easy thing to do and what most people avoid.
I could see how you arrive at that conclusion. I think that it's only a furtherance of his project, which is to draw some equivalence between our country or society and theirs, which again, I think is outrageous and insane.
But where are you getting that from?
From his own writing, his own essay.
Saagar, I literally am reading this book.
Okay, I'm not talking about the book.
And he does not say that.
I'm talking about the ideology that he put forth.
What he compares the apartheid Israel, modern day Israel to, is the Jim Crow South. That's what he compares it to. And I think that's accurate. I think that is highly accurate, and it's obviously a very powerful comparison to make in terms of the American political context, and especially given him and how people think of his credibility on these issues. So I don't know why it's so difficult for you to just say like, hey, I disagree with him on these other things, but good on him for like using his elite capital to say something that's powerful and true in a space that it's normally never heard.
Yeah, I guess I could say that. Look, for me, I have Ta-Nehisi derangement syndrome. Anything him, Nicole Hannah-Jones, Ibrahim Kendi, and all these other people, I honestly just don't care. I blame them for so many problems that we currently have.
And
yeah, I do.
Listen, I think it's fine to say you disagree with them, but to like say they're not allowed to have that ideology. But you basically are. You're blaming them for, every racial ill in America, which is insane when you consider the amount of continued discrimination, when you consider, George Floyd being murdered, when you consider Donald Trump going out and inciting terror in a small Ohio town, lying about Haitian immigrants, to say, oh, every racial problem we have is because of Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in The Atlantic.
I think him and his project radicalized the American elite to believe that race is the only problem that we have in America. And as we just covered in our working class segment, the actual people who are working class don't agree with that. They're a lot of Latinos are very anti more immigration. So is that racist? That's my point, is that his viewpoint gives us nothing in the American political context.
But Saagar, again, to say you disagree with his viewpoint, legitimate. I have disagreements with his viewpoint, which I have expressed previously and have expressed in this segment. To say he's a villain, I mean, you're doing the same thing they're doing. You're an extremist. No. You're a terrorist.
I didn't say he was a terrorist.
I mean, you basically are. I don't understand why, especially someone who believes in the, open exchange of ideas and freedom of speech and, the ability to articulate and argue through these things, why you would just denigrate him as a human being
I don't want
versus attacking the ideas that you disagree with.
Okay, if somebody who you despise and said something bad had a good idea, a single sentence, would you think it was appropriate to castigate them as a hero for saying one thing?
I think they deserve credit for doing something that... Here's the thing. This goes against his own personal career interests.
Yeah.
Very clearly. So does he deserve credit for that? Yes. Think of how many people, when faced with this issue, when either totally close their eyes or know that it's wrong and keep their mouths shut because they want to keep their gig. How many American elites do? So many. And so, yes, of course he deserves credit for like burning that political capital, for actually living up to what he claims, which is to be a voice for the voiceless. And there are plenty of people who, in the Black Lives Matter movement who Kendi and these sorts of people who it just appears to be like a career ambition grift. And I think with this action and these writings and the way he responds in these interviews, he's proven himself to be different, to have a different kind of moral character than people who are just, grifting off of something that was popular in elite circles. So yeah, I give him credit for that. Absolutely.
To be different, yes, absolutely. I don't want people to have some takeaway that I think this person is like a hero or whatever. I really
You've made it clear that you don't think
good,
that.
I hope so. And by the way, I didn't say for censorship. If he came here, I would say it to his face too. We could go into it for an hour. I would let him speak. I don't think that other guy was allowing him. I don't think what he said was anti-Semitic or anything like that. I don't know. I just have a very different view of who he is and the way that he's trying to like further his whole like race-only project. And I think it's obviously fused in an ideology which I core disagree with.
But Saagar, here's the other thing that you're missing from his writing here that I actually think you would potentially agree with, is he writes that the fact that you've been oppressed or that you've been a quote-unquote victim does not absolve you, does not mean that you cannot then go and turn around and do the very things that were done to you. That is the core of the message in the book, The Message. Mm-hmm. That is a core of what he's articulating here, which I think is a very important concept when you think about, the Israeli state founded out of the Holocaust. And he talks about the fact that, in the case for reparations, he made this point about how using the Israeli state and German reparations to help found the Israeli state as a positive example of reparations. And it was actually some of you may know, Rania Khalek, went to one of his events and stood up and said, you really misunderstand this, because those reparations were not to the Jewish people or survivors of the Holocaust. They were to create a new state that has caused new oppression. And he sat with that. That's what he said. That bothered him. Like Rania got shouted down. It was at a synagogue.
I read it in his
She got shouted down. You know, she was like demonized in that group. She was very nervous, she said on Twitter, to have stood up and said that at the time. But he actually sat with that, and that led him down this path. And it leads him to this, you know, to this central thesis that it's really important to understand that, yes, of course, the victims of the Holocaust, horrifying, like the fact that there was this, you know, pressing sense of a need for a Jewish safe space, obviously horrifying, obviously important. That doesn't mean the fact that you were a victim or you were a victim of oppression doesn't mean you can't turn around and that the roles can't be reversed and that these, you know, designators of like oppression and oppressed are locked in time and place. And so, you know, I think that's something that you agree with, and I certainly think it's something that's important to be heard. And so I appreciate the fact that while I have disagreements with him, that he gets to have that voice in these elite spaces where those sorts of concepts, and especially, you know, speaking for the Palestinians, where that is never heard. So that's my only
I
point.
understand, at least on that point, is that the only reason he's allowed on CBS this morning is because of who he is.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, it's true. He's going to burn a lot of bridges doing this. And it is true that not even Palestinian perspective, but really anything that goes against, what's that guy's name? Tony? Whatever, like Tony's ideology.
Yeah.
That is not common. And there's a reason I think that you're going to see it here on this show or and actually, frankly, a lot of independent media these days, frankly, a lot more interesting, is specifically because of this. So yeah, it's true. I think he burns probably some bridges. He's going to experience a lot of pushback. I guess my only point was that within his ideology and specifically like who he is as a figure in American politics, I think it's still important to evaluate like what this book is and also why he was able to get that CBS News post and what,
that's right.
and then also consider what it meant for that to be, you know, for him to be such a respected figure. And I don't, you know, for me, I just can't erase what I see as like a decade, honestly, of him pouring fire on a horrible accelerant in American politics, only to then excuse it because, oh, he went on CBS News and wrote a book about Palestine. That's just not enough, I guess. And look, I invite him here on the show. I'd be happy to talk to him. I doubt he would.
I've already invited him.
Okay,
on the
good.
show,
I will tell you this. We can go as long as he wants. We can go for 3 hours. We can go for 5 hours. I will not cut him off, and we will sit there and we will talk. And I would say everything I just said right to his face.
I think what I would say is that it says something that the previous writings were comfortable for these spaces.
Of course they were.
Because, I mean, first of all, the reparations is such an unlikely political outcome that when you propose something that is outside of what anyone really thinks is politically possible, that becomes sort of inherently safe. And because if there's this sense, this race pessimist sense of like, this is just how things are in America and it can never change, then it also sort of absolves you from having to make political change that could be threatening to elite circles. So I think it's telling that the previous work was very comfortable for people in this space and that this work is not. And I think, you know, I think that's an important thing to note. Mm-hmm. So in any case, we'll go ahead and move on because we've got Jill Stein, Green Party candidate for president, standing by and have a lot of interesting things to talk to her about. So let's go ahead and get to that.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.